Welcome back to the discussion, Application Security Imperatives. Where is the new perimeter? Sponsored by F5 Networks on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Randy Wood, the Regional Vice President for Federal Sales for F5 Networks. Now, Randy, we talked a lot about in that last segment of the show SSL everywhere, the idea of really using SSL encryption to protect your data, both inbound traffic, outbound traffic. It all relates back to this idea of the zero trust model. But there's more to the zero trust model, and as agencies are implementing, SSL encryption can be tough. I think we've established that. What else is a big part of this idea of a zero trust model?
Yeah, so when we talk about this new perimeter, remember we're talking access, we're talking applications, right? Users to applications, anywhere, any place, sort of any device. SSL everywhere gets us data integrity, confidentiality, protection in transit at the application. Let's talk about another challenge that the federal government's facing today, which is application deployment, right? We're coming from an on-prem world and increasingly watching our applications migrate to the cloud. And in some cases, these are hybrid deployments. And so there's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty with how I extend application access, authorization, policy management in, let's just call it a hybrid world. So one part of the zero trust model is application access, application policy management, back to what I said, independent of where those applications sit. That is this hybrid model. Not every agency, not any agency is going to give up all application control to the cloud. So we're going to have a hybrid model. And how do you transparently provide application policy management services in this zero trust model in a very transparent way that doesn't compromise the application experience? That's another good example of the challenge with zero trust model and how we overcome that.
And when you talk about application policy management, are you talking about who has access and when, or even just where the application lives and then where the data resides? Define that a little bit more.
Yeah, so it's all of the above.
Yep.
I'm talking about a concise, tailored policy management, policy control on an application by application basis, right? I'll give you an example. The first question I asked a customer in a typical meeting is, hey, how many applications do you have? And the answer is almost always the same, no idea. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. A lot of these applications were hastily developed, hastily deployed applications. And a lot of them are legacy, and in some cases legacy mission essential applications that lack a lot of just the basic security requirements that you would expect today. And so application policy management from an FI perspective is on an application by application basis, I can apply certain custom policies to that application with respect to who has access to them, where are these people coming from. If I can't validate the identity of a certain connection, I drop the connection, et cetera, et cetera. So it is giving policy to the hastily deployed, to the underdeployed, underdeveloped, and also in a what we sort of call no app left behind, right? We'll handle all your applications on a case-by-case way.
It's interesting, no app left behind, but one of the things that happens, and I think we saw this with the OPM problem, is they had such an old infrastructure, and we're not going to get into their problems, but when you deal with a customer who has an older infrastructure that has applications that are 15, 20, 25 years old, can the current modern technologies work, or can you figure a way to make them work well?
You absolutely can. You absolutely can in this proxied architecture world. That is, I'm going to provide services on your behalf, whether it's SSL offload or that break and inspect capability. What if, to the OPM example, I could just look at all my outbound traffic, right? Whether it's encrypted or not. What if I had a capability, I could offload that capability to a purpose-built appliance that could do that and could flag and say, hey, this is unauthorized traffic flow. That one capability makes a huge difference, and it doesn't require a lot, if any, changes into that old dated infrastructure.
And I think that's key because there's so much talk about operation and maintenance spending versus DME spending, and agencies don't have the DME, that when you talk about adding this security layer in, it's not going to be a huge buildup of okay, well, now we got to take this out, we got to fix this. It seems like it rides almost on the perimeter, or inside the perimeter.
Sure.
So let's talk about an example of an agency using the F5 SSL solutions today. Again, I know there may be some sensitivities, but tell us what you can about who's using this and solving some problems.
Yeah, so lots of good examples across all relevant Fed markets, civilian, defense, intel market. A good example comes to mind is a large service provider, or any service providers in the defense space, right, that is providing application and data service on behalf of a different agency or a different set of users, right? So this is a lot of high volume data that they don't own, that's coming from lots of places, again, in a highly aggregated, high volume way, where SSL is the way by which this traffic is encrypted. It is offloaded to purpose-built appliances that F5 provides and ensures that level of data integrity and data confidentiality on the inbound, for sure, and increasingly on the outbound. So lots of good examples, but the service provider model is a great place to look to see that in action today.
And because they're accepting so much different data from so many different places, having that SSL encryption in place gives them some, at least, sense of mind, maybe some peace of mind.
Absolutely.
That they know, okay, we can be sure that this data at least is better protected than if it wasn't.
Well, I think the government is probably a better example than a typical enterprise user, commercial user, in that I told you 30% of most websites today are using SSL encryption. The government is a much higher percentage than that, but they still haven't evolved to all critical communications, or all communications for that matter.
When they're using it and you're installing it, what are some of the things the challenges they face? Can you talk a little bit about their experience with it? I mean, it's not just you put a new application on, you're good to go. I mean, what do they have to deal with?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge I think we've seen is the lack of intelligence and visibility customers have into their data flow. We call this context. When customers ask me, what does F5 know about security? My answer is context. I know context. I know context in three ways. I know client context, everything there is to know about that client because I'm seeing in that data transmission, to include geolocation type information. I know traffic flow content. Hey, is there a SQL injection in this traffic flow? I know those things. I know application context. I have visibility into that. So what that provides then is a level of intelligence that allows me to better understand my risk and what I need to do to combat that risk. So context is, in my experience, one of the biggest challenges our customers have.
And there's so many times you see surveys, when I talk to agency chief information officers, they say, we're doing some application rationalization. We don't understand how many applications we have. And then they also say, well, we also have to understand where we're getting our data from. And I think it's that context you bring out is really the key piece there. The other, I guess the third leg of this stool, if you will, is, okay, security is great, but you still need performance, you need availability, and both of them have to be better than ever. So how do you find that right balance of availability, performance, as well as security?
It is clear core competence at layers 4 through 7, right? To be a little technical.
What's that mean?
It's at the transport layer and above.
There you go.
Transport layer and above, it is competence to understand what that data looks like and how to make better decisions such that I get better performance, that I get better availability. If I am streaming a video broadcast and I have 10 servers that could handle that, something in the middle is going to make the decision is the best place to send that connection, right? That's availability, that's performance. So it's having purpose-built hardware, and in some cases, virtual editions of that hardware instantiation to make those decisions to give the best application experience. Think about your favorite application. I talk about mine all the time. I don't care what happens between me and the server or the servers. I need it to do what I want it to do. It's a manifestation of how I do business, the decisions I make, and I want all that complexity abstracted. Well, there's something in the middle that's doing that.
Right. How many times, though, it's not necessarily the security side, but it's the other person's side. It's the end user who is slowing down the application. I mean, because of network connections that you have no control over, or because of bandwidth, or because they're on Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi is slow. I mean, does that all play into this discussion too?
It does to a degree. The things you can control, right? You can control so much. You can control so much between layers 4, the transport layer and above, and there's things that the speed of the wireless in the hotel you can't control, right? But I think increasingly users are smart enough to set their expectations in a realistic way. But again, it is all about that user experience and believing that I'm having a secure application experience on my iPad or on my desk computer or on my phone.
And I think it's the other piece that's very important is as your company or whomever explains to the CIO, to the Chief Information Security Officer, to the mission owner that we are securing you from, again, the transport layer and above, and the rest is up to you to make sure it works, but we're not going to, putting this security piece on is not going to impact the application negatively. And I think once you can explain that, they go, okay, good. Because again, I think we talked about this earlier in the program, so much of security gets a bad rap for saying, well, it's just going to slow us down, it's going to make things harder, it's not something we want to do, so therefore, make that decision that you talked about earlier, don't sacrifice performance for security or vice versa.
Well, and so, I think the real opportunity in federal IT organizations today is a coming together, if you will, of the IT staff, the application development team, the network team, and the security team to better work together as we build or fix these applications.
And the other piece of that is the mission team. I mean, when you talk about the integration that's happening, really the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, FITARA, is forcing that to happen more quickly than maybe it would at some agencies, and it's just kind of giving that underlying current to others. We talked a lot about the zero trust model, we talked about SSL encryption, we talked about the federation of where applications live. When an agency, if they haven't already started doing this, or they want to start looking at SSL encryption, or at least understanding how to protect at the application layer, move the perimeter, if you will, what should they keep in mind? What are some common potholes that you've seen?
Yes, I think the first thing to keep in mind as agencies either begin to think about this or evolve their strategy is don't try and do all at once, right? We're talking about SSL everywhere. That's an end state. Take smaller steps to get there. What are the mission critical assets today? What can I do? What can I better protect through SSL encryption, for example, with very little changes to that back-end infrastructure? I think a pothole we've seen is some organizations try and bite off too much.
Eat the elephant in one bite.
Eat the elephant in one bite, or they're into. You can't. You can't. Turns out you can try.
You choke many times.
You do. So you can't do that, and you can't. You have to do something, right? So we've got the 30-day cyber sprint. You have to take action. You have to be clear. Things like data loss protection, advanced persistent threat, malware. These are the buzzwords now. We can't forget about what I'll call the old school attacks that we thought were gone. Distributed denial of service. DDoS attacks are on the rise, right? They're often a camouflage for what's really occurring. Malware, all the things that web application firewalls were designed to do. Pick apart this. Think about, first of all, this new perimeter in the context of access and applications. Do that first and simplify how you get your head around this and figure out, hey, where are the real vulnerabilities and what can I fix right now without massively disturbing what I have in place.
In many ways, what you're talking about also is that risk-based approach. Okay, what applications do we really need high availability, high performance, but also really need to be secure because of the data in it? And then, okay, what happens if we do this? What's the impact going to be? Are there things that when you talk to agencies, their biggest question is what usually? I mean, do you get a sense of, is there any trends you can point to?
I think you can go back, it seems like a long time ago, go back to the Snowden thing. Right? Insider threat is top of mind, right? So agencies and federal customers are figuring out very quickly that, hey, I've got to take a whole new approach to how I give access, what policies I put. The advice I give is you can be very granular with respect to policy enforcement, distribution across the entirety of your applications, right? So it's not one size fits all, and it's no application left behind. I think that's top of mind right now. We're getting attacked from lots of places, but the insider threat is as big as ever.
That could be a whole nother show.
Probably.
That's all the time we have for today. You've been listening to the discussion, Application Security Imperatives, Where is the New Perimeter? Sponsored by F5 Networks on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'd like to thank my guest today, Randy Wood, the Regional Vice President of Federal Sales for F5 Networks. I'm your host, Jason Miller. For more information on this program, visit federalnewsradio.com, search F5 Networks.
On behalf of F5 Networks, thank you for joining our discussion. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate will receive an email with the download instructions immediately following this webinar. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.